Welcome to the Transformative Pathways Podcast with your host, Jason Doby. Join Jason as he explores the many ways to unlock personal growth, mindfulness, and spiritual transformation. So now, please welcome the host of Transformative Pathways, Jason Doby.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Jason Doby, founder of Transformative Pathways Life Coaching. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our topic for today's episode is intuitive leadership, how to discover and step into your calling, with our guest, Lindsey Mazza, who is joining us today from Grimsby, Ontario. Lindsey is an entrepreneurial lawyer turned leadership catalyst and keynote speaker. She knows all about what the power of self-advocacy can do to transform your calling and your future. Having been born with a physical disability that has affected all aspects of her life, she has tapped into the power of her own voice to change her narrative so that others can step into their true purpose. After dedicating a life to serving others, Lindsey is now taking her story to center stage, where her calling has led to a desire to impact as many people as possible through her own resilience, passion, and intuition. If you are looking to make an unexpected personal breakthrough or step into the spotlight of your own life, Lindsey's words will leave you inspired and motivated. Lindsey, welcome to the show, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jason. I'm so happy to be here.
Amazing. Well, to start things off, Lindsey, I'd love to hear about your personal journey and how you navigate, and also what led you to shift from being a lawyer to becoming a mentor and a motivational speaker.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I was born with a physical disability, so it's a visible difference. But I spent my whole life actually not talking about it because it didn't seem to serve me. So I ran from it. And it was partially this, layer of protection that I built around myself. But also looking back on my life, it was learned because, as you can imagine, I experienced a lot of unkindness as a child, a lot of overt discrimination, and a lot of it was at the hands of adults, my teachers. So I wasn't getting the accommodations that I required in a lot of cases. So I just stopped talking about it because what was the point? So I learned to just work harder and figure out how to create solutions within a world that wasn't made for me. And I was really good at it. And when it came time for me to choose my career path, I decided to pursue law. And I did that for multiple reasons. The one being that I had been an advocate for myself my entire life. So I thought, law would be a really natural transition for me. But law was not an accessible career either. I actually got denied my accommodations to write my entrance exams and had to appeal that process, and then went on to practice in a profession that was full of barriers. But I figured it out, and I had a very successful career. I built a multi-city law firm from the ground up with partners. And then my dad passed away at the end of October in 2023. And my dad had the same physical disability. He had a legal career as well. He was a lawyer and then a judge. And it was in his passing that I realized that I couldn't continue to run from this huge part of my life. And I had to start talking about my disability. And when I did, I realized that it's actually been a superpower of mine because it has given me so many tools, a loud and strong voice. And when I really tapped into that and radically accepted all parts of myself, I couldn't continue to practice law because I knew that I was meant to do something much bigger than that.
Right. Well, that's amazing. And, how was that transition for you when you transitioned out of your career? And what was the moment when you realized that, your calling was shifting, or the shift was happening?
Yeah. So I remember the day that I became a lawyer. we call it being called to the bar, and there's this big ceremony and you take an oath with all of the other lawyers being called at that time. And I remember being surrounded. So that would have been in 2013, 12 years ago now. And everybody around me was so excited that they had achieved this, this goal of becoming a lawyer. And I remember on that day feeling full of dread because I didn't want to be a lawyer. It was the thing that I did because it would provide me a lot of opportunities, but I knew intuitively that that was not my path. But like most people, you repress it, you've paid for school, you've done all of these years of work, and I continued on. But it was at the expense of my mental health, my physical health. So over a decade of doing it, and then in the passing of my dad, my mental health was really not good. And I remember waking up in the morning. So he passed in October of 2023. And by January of 2024, I was waking up laying in bed thinking I'd rather be dead than go to work. And that was when I had a moment of like, this is not living. My body is screaming at me. My intuition's screaming at me. And when I started to share this with other lawyers, they would say to me, yeah, me too. And they had accepted this. And I thought, I'm not accepting this. This is not how I want to live the rest of my life. And that's what sparked this massive healing journey. It was through that journey that I realized that this is what I needed to be doing. And it's a fairly recent transition for me. It's been, it was just late last fall. It's been amazing so far. I actually can't imagine going back. And, I wake up in the mornings now and I'm like, I don't know how I did that grind for those many years.
Oh, I totally get it. And I think your story is kind of similar to my story. I was in a career for 26 years as a chef, and I hated it. And I didn't want to be a chef, but I was good at it. And I'd already worked so hard to get to where I was. I thought, well, what else am I going to do? Like, it doesn't make sense to start over now. I'm already at the top of my career. The last job I had, I got a job as a head chef at a high-end winery, and I thought that would help bring back my passion. And that's when I truly realized that it wasn't what I wanted to do. And everyone was asking me how my new job was, because everything was great. And on the outside, I was supposed to be happy. But that's when I knew deep down inside that this wasn't what I wanted to do. And I was just lying. And I would say, oh, yeah, it's great. It's great. I'm making all this money and I have this status, but I definitely wasn't happy. And I can totally relate to what you said about that you'd rather be dead. I remember I had a head chef job in my 30s, so probably about 13 years ago. And I remember I used to wish that I would die in my sleep so that I didn't have to go to work the next day. And I had that for a couple years. And so I can definitely relate to that feeling of, living in that feeling of dread every day, waking up, not wanting to do it, and the stress of everything. That's, I definitely don't miss that. That wasn't a way to live a life. Definitely not good for your mental health and your physical health and all that stuff. So that was, I can definitely relate to everything that you just said there, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that we need to talk about it more because, I read something recently, excuse me, because looking back at that, like in the moment, I started to share this with like my closest friends, and I'd be like, oh, but I would never do anything. And I remember reading something recently on social media about passive suicide and how it never starts with a plan. It starts with these thoughts and the persistence of the thoughts. And it create, you're in this space of like life becomes hopeless. And I think so many people are living in that state and they don't have a support system or people to reflect back to them how they can make a change. And I think that's why it's so important for us to be talking about it, because I feel it so deeply, Jason, thinking of like, okay, like how could I get hit by a bus today so I don't have to go to work? Like the number of people that have talked about this, like that is your body. and mind and spirit, whatever you want to call it, screaming at you that you are not living in alignment.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's when we really need to pay attention and hopefully start helping people to pay attention before it gets to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And two things you brought up there I can relate with as well. I remember I worked at this one fancy restaurant and I used to drive to work and I used to visualize that I would just pull my car into the other lane and hit a transport truck. I used to think like that all the time.
Yeah,
But I forgot about that until now you said that. And another story I want to share, I worked at another really high-end restaurant and a couple of us in the kitchen, we'd always joke about killing ourselves. It sounds weird to say that out loud, but the joke of putting a gun to your head because your day was so bad. And we even had this joke where we wouldn't waste a bullet, so we'd line a couple of ourselves up and we'd pretend to shoot ourselves in the head and killing multiple of us at the same time. And I forgot about that until now that you said that. But yeah, that was in my industry, that was normal. You ask someone how their day is going and their first thing is they say they want to kill themselves because they're so stressed or all the things are going on, all the things that you're dealing with. But like you said, that is important. I never really realized how important that was to talk about because a lot of people are going through that and that's their normal.
It is their normal. I mean, it's certainly the norm in law. I can tell you that because the number of people, that I've been openly talking about this with, I've had lawyers reach out to me being like, oh my God, like I thought I was the only one. And I remember the first day of law school, this was our intro. We were all sitting in a room and there was a professor at the front and they were like, look to your left, look to your right. One of you will either try to commit suicide or commit suicide in your lifetime. And I was like, what? And it wasn't like, hey, if you're feeling this way, we want to rally around you and here are resources. It was like, we're just letting you know that this is the norm. And it's perpetuated within the profession because it is a very isolating profession. And I don't know if that's what it was like for you, but it's not a team-based profession. People very much sit in the energy of every single person's your competitor. And, they relish in other people's weaknesses, right? Because in a courtroom, it's your opponent. And I've never operated that way. I never understood it. So combining that with all of it, it was like, what am I doing? This isn't even who I am as a human, let alone what I want to be doing for the rest of my life. And it didn't matter how much money I was making. I made great money, but it was like, you don't even have time or energy for fun anymore. You forget what fun is. And, who wants to live like that?
Yeah, exactly. You don't even have time to have a life. And I don't know anyone personally that that has committed suicide from working in a kitchen, but I know lots of chefs, like high-end chefs, Michelin star chefs in Europe and stuff, would have killed themselves over losing a Michelin star and stuff like that because these guys are working crazy, like 16 hours a day, and then for that thing, and then when it gets taken away from them, they feel like they have nothing to live for anymore. They feel like they're nothing, so they end their lives. And the kitchen is a team environment in a way, but it's also relatable that it is cutthroat in the way that everyone's trying to get ahead. Or I've worked in kitchens where people would be sabotaging each other, fighting for equipment and all that stuff. So it is kind of a little bit of both, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Awesome, Lindsey. I guess next question I have for you, stepping into this new role and changing careers, what were some of the biggest fears and doubts that were coming up for you, and how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I think, like for anyone, when you're making these huge moves, obviously the fear is that what if I'm not successful? Like, is the money going to come in? Am I making the right decision? And, I think the real important thing for people to remember is you're always going to have those thoughts, right? You're always going to have those fear-based thoughts, but those fear-based thoughts are not based on fact, and they're not based on your ability, right? So we live in a certain way where we have this internal belief system about how successful we can be in whatever area that is, right, in your life, whether it's how much money you can make, what you can do for a career, your self-worth relating to relationships. And every time you challenge that belief system, it's called the upper limit theory. I don't know if you've heard of the upper limit
No,
theory.
no, I haven't. No, I have not.
So, yeah, so the upper limit theory is this built-in, basically ceiling, and it's our belief system of how high we can go. And every time we are approaching that upper limit, our ego gets louder. And that
Right.
ego is the fear-based thoughts, the self-criticism, like you're crazy, somebody else can do this, but you're not good enough to do that. And that's because our brain's purpose is to keep us safe. So when we are reaching that limit, the intent is that we break past that limit. So our brain is going to try to keep us under that limit, because that is where our mind and body feel safe. So it's really important for people to know when that is happening, because you are then able to zoom out and look at your thoughts and situations from a third-party perspective, know this is what is happening, and then you can incorporate the tools that you need to break past that limit. So here's a simple example. People who go on diets to lose weight. Most people lose the same 15 or 20 pounds. Once they've lost that weight, they stop dieting and they put it back on. So you start to self-sabotage to keep yourself under that upper limit. And that's applicable to any area of your life, right? So of course I had all of those things, but I was working with the proper mentors, and I've done so much self-learning that I knew what was happening. And the beauty in all of this is every time you get past that upper limit, that internal dialogue, you're leveling yourself up to this other level, and it's a breakthrough, and then life just continues to open up.
Yeah, absolutely. I have heard about that. It was just described a little bit differently to me, or it was called something different. But I remember my mentor explaining that to us. As you said it, I could see the chart she made, but she almost drew like a tree with different branches, and the bottom ones were the thickest, and then they got thinner as you went up. But it was almost like when you're about to level up, you have to go through that branch or go through that ceiling, and that's where that uncomfortable part is. But yeah, that's totally true. And once you get through that, you're leveling up, and then you're at the next level. So yeah, that is. I know the biggest thing for me, my transition is fairly new as well. The biggest thing for me was just the self-doubt, and my brain telling me why I couldn't do it, and all the reasons why I was going to fail. But I guess the one question that came up when you were talking there was, when it comes to following our intuition, we know that we're making the right decision or making the right move, but then we still have to, navigate all those negative thoughts in our head telling us, I guess it's like our soul is telling us to do it, but our mind is telling us not to do it, sort of thing.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I don't know how woo you want to get on here, but I'm
Yeah.
a very, yeah. So I'm a very intuitive person. I'm just going to claim it. I'm psychic. I've had psychic experiences my entire life, but like most people, because most people are inclined this way, but like most people, I separated myself from those gifts, because that's what we're taught, right? We teach children from a very young age to ignore their intuition. And we do this by, the way the school system is set up. We force kids to be friends with all children, regardless of what their instincts are telling them, right? And that doesn't mean we should be telling kids, be mean or isolate anyone, but those instincts of like, that's my person or that's not my person, that's your intuition. But we're raised in a society where we're told to ignore that, and we're supposed to favor people pleasing, and you don't want to follow those things because you don't want to be rude. And that's what creates the separation. And I've always tapped in to, my downloads, and I've seen angels my entire life. But all of that stopped the more that I became separated from myself. And when I lost my dad, everything just, the door kicked wide open. And I started to hear my dad. I've seen him, and these were such clear messages that it was undeniable. Like it was to the point where I would lose something and I'd be like, "Hey dad, like, where's this thing?" And I would hear where it was, and I would go there, and there it was. So I really started to lean into all of that. And I think that the beauty in that is you really start to understand the difference between intuition and your thoughts, right? And that's the number one thing people ask me is, how do I know whether it's my intuition or it's my brain taking over? And there's a really easy distinction. Your intuition it'll feel calm. Your body will feel calm when you're getting an intuitive hit, and it is helping you move forward. Your brain or ego, it will pose things as almost a threat or a promise. Like, if you don't do this thing, something bad is going to happen. Or if you do this thing, there's this like outlandish promise on the other side of it, and it doesn't feel good in your body. It creates some sort of anxiety, right? So intuition is this calm that falls over you.
I love that. I love that. I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I often say or like to think that I'm psychic or I can tell things are going to happen, but my problem is I don't realize it till after it happens. So there was a time where I was writing it down where I'd have, ideas that this is going to happen. Like, I'll give you some examples. Like one day, I woke up in the morning one day and I thought about one of my employees. For some reason, I was thinking about him, and then like an hour later, they called me and he had an accident in the kitchen and had to go to the hospital. And I'm just like, I didn't know that happened, but for some reason I was thinking of him. Or or another time, my daughter put a metal container in the microwave, and I didn't even see her put it in there, but I instantly went and stopped and took it out right before she turned it on and pressed start. But I didn't see what she put in there. I had no idea. Just like weird things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'll pick things up and I'll think like, man, I'm psychic, but I don't know if it's, I don't trust myself, or I don't really notice it until after the thing happens, when I put the pieces together, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think what's cool about those examples that you just explained is most people are in tune with their intuition during situations that are scary, right? So when grief and scary situations are in your life, I feel like the veil or the self-doubt is really thin, because those messages have to come through, and it's tougher for people. Like, your defenses are down, right? When there's things like that happening, when a warning needs to come through, and your brain gets out of the way. But to be able to tap in all the time, it requires you to really exercise it like a muscle, right? So for me, I am in constant communication. I call it my spirit team, my guides, my angels, my dad. I check in multiple times throughout the day. And at the very beginning, when I wanted to, I needed the constant validation, is you can ask for signs, right? So your spirit team, guardian angels, they are waiting to help you, but you have to invite them in, right? Because we have free will as humans. So you have to ask them for their assistance, and they're just waiting for it. So you start asking for signs, like, like something crazy. So let's say I'm trying to make a decision and I feel like I know what the decision I'm trying to make. I used to ask for a sign. Like I'd say, okay, spirit team, if this is what I'm supposed to be doing, send me a pink elephant. Like I would say, asks for something crazy, and I would do it in my head away from all electronic devices because I didn't want my phone hearing me and, screw up the algorithm. And those signs would start to come through very regularly. And if they didn't come through, that was them telling me, yeah, this is not the right thing. So that's a quick thing. That's an easy thing that people can start to incorporate on a regular basis.
That's super cool. Yeah, I like that. And I just learned about spirit guides and spirit teams not that long ago, probably a couple of years ago. And I guess the one thing that for me, I communicate with them. I don't really ask questions. Like I've tried to sometimes like ask questions before I go to bed. Um, but I haven't had much success, or maybe I just don't remember the dreams I had or whatever. But for me, the big thing is um, body sensations. Like my whole body tingles, and like usually down my back, my arms, all the time, or I'll be thinking of them or something, and I'll get like these full on body sensations. So I guess I kind of um, correlate that with my spirit team or my angels, but I'm not 100% sure. Or if I'll be doing a meditation and then I'll feel it, and then I'll start, talking to them mentally or something like that. Have you ever experienced like anything like that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. And I mean, you thinking, so just right there, you saying, I think it's them, but I'm not sure. That's your self doubt. Because if your
Right.
initial thought is, it's my spirit team, it's your spirit team, period, end of
Hmm.
story. And
Yeah.
that's how they're communicating with you. So, yeah, I get full body. I call them my angel bumps,
Yeah.
a full body knowing. Um, and I also, I don't know if you've heard of human design. Have you ever heard of human design? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know what yours is?
No, not off the top of my head. No.
Okay. So these are things that I like to tell people to really get to know themselves about, right? And for those who don't know what human design is, it's not astrology, but it's similar in that it's based on your time of birth, where you're born. And it tells you everybody has a specific profile. And it's fascinating because when you really get to know those parts of yourself, you learn through human design where your intuition shows up for you. So for me,
Hmm.
um, it shows up in my spleen. That's what it's called, the human design. It's called splenic authority. And when I started to learn what that was, for people that it shows up in their spleen, you get like an intuitive hit, and it's like, it's very fast, and it's almost like, where did that come from? I just heard that thought and then it's gone. So I started to be able to strengthen that relationship. I'd like tap in internally and I'd be like, okay, is this a yes or a no? But for you, it probably shows up in an emotional way because you're saying you feel it in your body.
Hmm.
So it would be fascinating to know what your profile is. You should look into it, and then you can deliberately tap into those areas.
That sounds amazing. And when you said that was my spirit team, I got the buzzing feeling again, so the confirmation, and that's the kind
Mhm.
of, yeah. I guess I do kind of doubt myself a little bit too, but with the human design, how would someone look that up? Is that like a book you can get or something online you can figure out?
Yeah, so there's online. I'm just going to pull, it's online and there's an app. There's multiple apps, but let me just see. Um, there's one called My Human Design, and you need to know your time of birth, where you were born, date of birth, all the things. And it tells you so how you make things happen. So, for example, um, there's different categories. I'm a projector, so the way projectors manifest and work is we are meant to be kind of the, what's the word, like the lighthouse. So we bring people together, we share our wisdom, we're not meant to be doing the grinding work because it's not how our energy works, which made total sense to me because as a lawyer, I was working as a grinder and I was exhausted all the time. So it wasn't in line with how I was supposed to be working. So it helps you understand how to maximize your own energy and really expand your career. And it also shows you how you're supposed to show up in the world and your role in helping others and how you learn certain things. So for me, I learn by trial and error based on my profile lines, which makes total sense because that's always how I've been. It's I'll try something. If it doesn't work, I'll try something else. And then I'm supposed to teach other people through my trial and error. So if you look that up, anybody listening, like it's this massive revelation that you will have because it also tells you how you know you're not living in alignment with your own profile based on how you feel. So for me, when I'm not in alignment, I feel bitter. And then when I realized this, I was like, oh my God, no wonder I was bitter for a decade because I wasn't working in alignment.
Right. I think I have heard about that. What are some of the other human designs? Like, I think the one that I resonated with was a manifesting generator. Is that?
So there's a manifesting generator, a generator, projector, reflector, and I think it's a manifester. I think there's 5 of them.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But the world has been made by generators. So the 9 to 5 work week, the working hard for abundance, the world has been designed for a generator, but a lot of people don't operate that way. So once you learn that, right, you're able to maximize your energy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally need to look that up. I did
Yeah, you
hear
do.
about that on a podcast and someone explained it, and I kind of, yeah, that's cool. I definitely gonna look that up after this.
Yeah, I interviewed Crystal Woods on Instagram. She's who I follow. I interviewed her for my podcast. I haven't released the episode yet, but it's Crystal with a K. And she really breaks down human design in a digestible way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Super cool. I love that. Another thing to to learn about and look into.
Mm-hmm.
That's so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. On the topic of intuitive leadership, I guess my question would be, what does intuitive leadership mean to you, and why is it so important?
Yeah, so I think that, I interviewed Kyle Gray. I don't know if you know who Kyle Gray is, but if people don't know, he's like, they call him the Angel Whisperer. He's got 9 books. I've been following him for years, and I reached out to him and he said yes to coming on my podcast. So I released that a few weeks ago. It was like a dream come true. This is what alignment is. Alignment is things happen because you're living in your authenticity. And we started to talk about authenticity. And he said something that was so simple but so profound. And he said, authenticity is really just about being like the most spiritual thing you can do is show up in 100% authenticity. But that requires you to be totally okay with who you are, right? If you are okay with you, the rest of the world will be. And I think that's what intuitive leadership is about. I think it's about stepping into your role of who you are and showing up in 100% authenticity. You're not there to play a role, and you see the value in how everybody that you were interacting with is part of your team. It's not about demanding respect. It's about being a leader and having people working with you who empower the company as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people really miss the boat on that. I mean, I saw it as a lawyer. As lawyers, you're only as good as the team that's working for you. Like without my legal assistant, I would have been lost. but lawyers treat their legal assistants like garbage. And it's this very abusive environment. And I could never understand it, because if you have a team who is part of the ideating, at the table, part of finding the solutions, and they are valued, then they want you to succeed and they want the company to succeed. And then everybody is succeeding. And I think a lot of people are put in these leadership roles just because they had the most years of experience or the highest degree, not because they've really earned it and they don't understand what leadership actually means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. When I was running kitchens, I was, I guess I could say that a lot of chefs will manage a kitchen out of fear and obedience. It's kind of like military style. When I was, some of the chefs I worked for used to throw up before work because of my anxiety and all that stuff. And I remember, I'd throw up in the morning in the shower. I'd take my dog for a walk. I'd throw up a couple times because of the stress I was having. And then when I get to work, walking from my car into the building, I'd throw up again or just be dry heaving or whatever. But I was never the leader like that. I tried to, we still got things done and we were productive. There was times when you had to discipline people, but I was more about, I wanted my staff to want to be at work. I wanted them to have fun. I didn't want them to have that anxiety and stuff. So I used to think that was my downside, that I was too nice to people. I used to always think like, oh, maybe I should be more like this chef was like me, like the Gordon Ramsay style chef, yelling and screaming at everyone. But that was never my way of being. And, then I would realize that when I was at work, there was a certain vibe in the kitchen and everyone was happy and everyone was jiving and everyone was doing their thing. But on my days off, whether my sous chef was running the kitchen or whatever, it was total different vibe, like a funeral in there. Everyone was just miserable. And it's something that I noticed near the end of my career too. And I was able to, even in stressful situations, because kitchens can get pretty busy and stressful, I was able to lead through, positive motivation and inspiration and lift people up. And people actually enjoyed being there and wanted to work for me rather than they were just there because they had to and they were afraid of me. So, I never really thought of that as intuitive leadership, but that's what came up for me when you were talking there.
Yeah, because you're tapped into what your employees need, and like, I'm sorry, being a leader is not reaching the top of the chain and paying forward the abuse that you experienced, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem, is we perpetuate it. So just because, like women in the legal profession who've been in it for years, just because they were abused and it was hard for them to reach success, doesn't mean that every woman that comes after you needs to have that experience to earn their stripes. Like, what are we doing? How about you do it differently? Like, it makes me so angry because, I did experience that abuse. And when I decided, I'm going to have my own firm, and I had people working for me, and I'm not saying I got it right all the time, because listen, I had my battle scars, so I was finding my way as well. But I cared about my employees. I didn't want them to learn trial by fire. Like, the first trial that I ever did as a baby lawyer, I was 26 years old. It was a 7-day trial, and I had never shadowed anybody else in a trial, because that was just like, well, you just figure it out. And we would just throw people into it. And, like you said, you'd vomit in the morning because you're like, I don't even know what I'm doing. And I thought, I am never going to treat anyone this way. I'm going to have people learn. They can shadow me. I will share precedents. I will be the person that cares about my employees. And that is a huge piece of why I had a successful career, because I did care about them. And that's being intuitive. You're looking outside yourself and you're tapping into what other people need, right? This is not leading from a place of ego.
Well, that's funny that I used to think that there was something wrong with me for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
My employees would walk in the door and I would look at them and I could instantly read them and tell, how they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And my goal was always to, try to help them. Maybe sometimes almost too much, where I needed to separate that to be, that I remember I had to tell myself, like I can't be trying to worry about everyone's feelings all the time because we have a job to do. Because I think some people would take advantage of that and play off that a little bit. But also, I thought of a story when you were talking there. I had an employee working for me, and it was a female, and she used to say, people would get frustrated. Like, say, you're working at a place and you take over, the one chef leaves and then the new chef comes in. And, the new chef, being myself, is running the kitchen differently than the old chef, while some of the old staff are still remaining. And I'd say that some of the people were maybe, I wasn't as hard as the old chef was, because I was, a little bit softer, a little bit more intuitive, and caring about people's feelings. But I remember this one person in particular saying that, when she was training in the kitchen, she went through hell. So that means that these people need to go through it too. And it was to the point where it was a difficult situation, because a lot of staff left because they didn't want to work with her, because they didn't like that environment. But in her mind, that was the way it had to be done. And and these people were weak because they weren't getting that treatment.
Yeah.
And that was that was a really difficult situation. And I was in the middle of that, and I was the head chef at this place. But
Yeah. It's funny because I heard something recently, and it was something along the lines of, the trauma that you experienced in your life is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. So, we can have empathy for people, and we can understand that how they're showing up in the world is a result of accumulation of experiences. But where my empathy ends is when people have zero inclination to be self-reflective and do better, right? And I think that's when we need to hold people's feet to the fire, because, you have to challenge those thoughts, and that's not being a leader, right? Just showing up in the same way that you treated, you're being a follower and you're contributing to the problem. So people really need to own the role that they are playing in their own journey and take responsibility for their actions and how they're showing up, and challenge it, do better, right? Don't just continue to show up in the same way because that's what you were taught. That's not how we make the world a better place.
Yeah, and I think that these people eventually learn in the long run. They think, this is how to do it. But when they get into that role, then they realize, okay, wait, I can't treat people like this. I can't do that because I don't have any I don't have any staff left. People don't want to work with me. So
yeah. Or maybe they don't learn and they continue to abuse people, and they're a contributor to this mental health crisis, right? So, we have to do better. People have to do better. And, just because, and you have to speak out too. And that's why these conversations are so important. Silence, just because you're not the person engaging in those behaviors, if you're silent about it, you're complicit in it, right? So we need to be allies and help shift and make the change.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you talked earlier about you were talking about authenticity. And what was that gentleman's name that you said was on your podcast? Kyle?
Yeah, so it's Kyle Gray, Gray.
Gray.
Yeah.
Yeah, talking about authenticity, that's one thing I've been really kind of thinking about, and that's one thing I've been trying to work towards is being authentic and being myself, especially showing up in the online space and posting on social media and stuff. And I think when I started, I was trying to be like everybody else, or trying to do what I thought that I was supposed to do to get likes or get followers or whatever. And then I realized that, the most important thing I can do is be authentic and be myself. But, it can be challenging. I'm just curious, why do you think it's so hard for people to be their true authentic self? Like what is it that's holding us back?
I think it's twofold. I think one is that we have become so separated from ourselves that I think most people don't actually know what the authentic version of themselves is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other piece of that is that we care entirely too much about what people think.
Mm-hmm.
We look for validation in the online space, and we're seeking validation based on how we think we should show up. And then we alter it accordingly. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how many followers you have, doesn't matter how many likes you have. It's about showing up as you, because being yourself totally authentically, there's nobody else like it, right?
Yeah.
And that is going to speak to the people that it needs to speak to. But if you're not showing up in that authentic space, then you're not going to be calling in the right people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we're just continuing this separation from self. And I think before you can truly step into an authentic role in a public way, you have to figure out what that authentic version of you is. And it's truly about radically accepting all parts of yourself. And that takes work. And it is not easy, right? It's not easy to look at those dark parts of yourself. But the longer that you avoid it, you're just building this bigger and stronger wall around yourself. And then people aren't going to be able to feel that authenticity because you're not even being authentic with yourself.
Yeah, that's so true. And, I had a mentor that was talking about that, like showing up in the online space, and people can feel it. Like if you're not being authentic, they can feel the energy, whether they know it or not, they can feel it and just scroll on. And I know for myself too, like that's one thing I've been really working towards, is just being more authentic and not caring what other people think. And I still have a ways to go, but I've come a long way in the past year. I've come a long, long, long way. But the social media space, since I've been posting online for the past year, that's been probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, trying to navigate that and not getting caught up on what other people think. And you have all these people online saying, I started a new account and I went viral in 10 days or 2 months or whatever. And they make it look like if you're not getting all these views and all these likes and all these things, then there's something wrong with you. So I think that's something that really got in my head a lot. But, I had a mentor recently tell us, when you're posting online, don't look at how many likes or how many comments or how many followers you got. Like, don't even care. So that's one thing I've been trying to do, and I've been better at it, but it's still, I'm still not 100%, but, just post something that you feel good about. Don't post something what you think other people want to hear, which is hard too when you're doing it as a business, because you're trying to, reach your ideal client or whatever. But, once you can find that sweet spot of, just being yourself. Like I follow this one guy online. I don't know his name. I think it's Hugo something. And he's the most outrageous, like individual. Like his hair's like purple and pink and up in the air. And he's just like, what's the word? So eccentric and outrageous. And like, he just does the silliest things, but he's so popular, and I think he's a coach of some sort. But I follow him, and I kind of use, whenever I see him, that's what I tell myself is like, I need to be more like this guy. He doesn't give a what people think of him, and he's got a huge following, and I'm not necessarily looking for a huge following. I don't want a huge following. Well, what was the other thing I was going to say? But yeah, I definitely use him as an example. And the other thing I wanted to say was, with myself in the last year, I've noticed that when, I've been playing small my whole life, and keeping and dampening my light. But in the times of the last year when my light was shining bright and I was showing up as myself, then people would tell me things like, people weren't used to that in my life either. So they were, it wasn't the real me. So they were saying, like, is everything okay with him? Like, why are you being so loud? Why are you being so excited? Like I was almost too much. I was too much for them. So then I kind of made myself small again. And I noticed that happen throughout the last year. I can think about 4 or 5 times where that happened. But, for me personally, but just reflecting on that. But, that's a difficult thing to do. Say if you're in a relationship or you're in a marriage, and then all of a sudden you start, showing up as your authentic self, and your wife's going like, I can't handle this. You're too much for me. It was just too much all at once, I think is what it was. But, so that was one of the challenges that I've been kind of going through. But I think I went from 0 to 100, within and I can be intense. So I just need to kind of, I can still be myself and tone it down a bit. But yeah, that's just my personal reflection on that.
I mean, I think, look, when you start to shift and you start to really step into your own light, it makes people around you nervous. That's the reality. Mm-hmm. Because you're going to have people who are going to level up with you, and you're going to have people that are going to fall away. And, leaving marriage aside, because that's a totally different ball of wax. But when we're talking about friendships and all of these relationships, there are going to be a lot of people in your life that are not true friends, because they don't want to see you evolve, because in your evolution, it reflects back to them how they are not evolving. So they are comfortable with you staying stuck. And those aren't your people, right? So as you start to level up, you really have to be okay with people falling away. People fall away, you're making room for the right people to come into your life who are going to challenge you, who are going to want to see you expand, because they're also looking to expand, right? And I think that's an important thing for people to remember, is that life that you are looking, towards is going to require a lot of change. And I think that it's the fear of change that keeps people stuck.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a great point, Lindsey. Well, we're coming to the end of our time here. So before we wrap things up, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to add for our listeners? Is there anything that we didn't cover today that you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so. I think, people can get in touch with me. I don't know if I'm on Instagram at the Lindsey Mazza, and LinkedIn, or my website is lindseymazza.com. And, I think that big change feels really scary for people. But what I like to say is just keep taking that one small step in the right direction, because, as you ease your way into that new journey, each step is scary, but it becomes easier.
Absolutely. That's the story of my life right now, is all those small steps. Yeah. And over the last, over a couple of years, they add up. They add up.
They do add up. Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. Well, amazing, Lindsey. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. And for everyone listening, I'll include your information in the show notes below if anyone wants to connect with you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And as always, if you'd like to connect with me, You can follow me on Instagram at transformative_pathways, and I'm also on TikTok at Jason_Doby. You can also find my link tree in the show notes below, where you'll have access to all my social media, my email list, and my private community. And if you're ready to take this work even deeper, I invite you to check out The Journey Within, my 12-week coaching program designed to help you break free from stress, self-doubt, and feeling stuck so you can live life with more confidence, clarity, and purpose. Just click the link below or visit jasondoby.com for more details. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you could like, subscribe, and follow us on your favorite listening platform. And if you'd like to support the show, we'd be so grateful if you could take a moment to leave us a review. It would mean so much to us and also help the show reach more listeners. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.
This has been the Transformative Pathways Podcast. Your host, Jason Doby. Tune in each week for more insights, inspiring stories, and transformative journeys. Until then, keep exploring the path to keep your best self. Saturdays, 3 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network, powered by B2 Studios.